What happens when one of the most outspoken comedians in the world walks onto a live daytime talk show and refuses to hold back, even when things get personal? Make sure to subscribe to Talk Show Fallout and like and comment for more talk show coverage. The audience is already energized, clapping as the camera pans across the studio. There's that familiar daytime buzz, a mix of excitement and curiosity. The hosts are seated at the table, smiling, shuffling their cards, exchanging glances like they know something interesting is about to happen. Whoopi leans forward slightly, adjusting her glasses, her tone calm but firm. All right, we're back, and we have a very special guest joining us today, comedian, actor, always unfiltered. Chris Rock. The audience erupts, cheers, whistles, loud applause. Chris walks out with that signature relaxed stride, giving a quick wave, nodding his head. He sits down, adjusts the mic slightly, looks around at the panel. All right, he says with a half smile. I can already feel it, y'all ready today. There's light laughter from the audience. Joy leans in immediately, smiling but sharp. We're always ready. The question is, are you? Chris smirks. I stay ready. That's how I don't get ready. The audience laughs again, but there's already a slight tension, subtle, but there. Whoopi jumps in, keeping things moving. So Chris, you've been doing a lot lately, touring, specials, talking about everything really. Chris nods. Yeah, life don't stop, so neither do I. Sunny tilts her head slightly. But you've also been, let's say, more direct lately. A little more outspoken than people expected. Chris raises an eyebrow. More than people expected? Or more than people are comfortable with? There's a brief pause. Audience murmurs. Joy jumps in quickly. Well, sometimes there's a line, right? Between being honest and stirring things up. Chris leans back slightly in his chair, crossing one leg over the other. See, that's interesting. Because every time somebody says there's a line, what they really mean is, you cross my line. Audience reacts, a mix of claps and oh. Whoopi lifts a hand, trying to keep control of the tone. But you understand, though, we're talking about public conversations, sensitive topics. Chris cuts in gently but firmly. Everything's sensitive now. That line lands. There's a pause, not awkward, but heavy. Sarah tries to lighten it slightly. Well, people are more aware now, I think. Chris nods slowly. Awareness is good. But sometimes awareness turns into fear of saying anything real. Joy leans forward again. Or maybe it's just respect. Chris looks directly at her. Respect goes both ways. The audience reacts again, louder this time. Whoopi steps in, voice calm but a bit more serious now. Let's not turn this into a debate just yet. We're having a conversation. Chris smiles. I thought that's what we were doing. A few audience members clap. Sunny jumps in, trying to shift the focus. Let's talk about your recent comments. You've mentioned before that comedy is getting harder because people are quicker to react. Do you really believe that? Chris doesn't hesitate. Absolutely. Why? Sunny asks. Because people don't listen to understand anymore. They listen to react. That hits the room differently. You can feel the shift. Whoopi watches him closely now. But isn't that also part of the responsibility? Knowing how your words affect people. Chris nods slowly. Of course. But let me ask you something. When did comedy become the place where we're supposed to be the most careful? Joy responds immediately. When people started getting hurt. Chris leans forward slightly now, his tone more focused. People been getting hurt. That's not new. Audience murmurs again. Sarah looks between them. But don't you think there's a difference now? Social media amplifies everything. Chris chuckles softly. Social media didn't create sensitivity. It just gave it a microphone. That line gets a strong reaction, applause, a few laughs. Whoopi folds her hands on the table. But there's also accountability now. Chris nods. There should be. Then he pauses. But accountability shouldn't mean you only get one perspective. Joy shakes her head slightly. That sounds like an excuse. Chris looks at her directly. No, that sounds like balance. The tension is more visible now. Even the audience feels it. You can hear less laughter, more quiet attention. Sunny steps in again. Okay, but let's bring this closer to home. You've made comments before that some people felt were directed at this show, at this table. The audience reacts, louder this time. Whoopi's expression tightens slightly, but she stays composed. Chris looks around the table, then back at Sunny. I've made comments about a lot of things. Sunny presses, including Whoopi. There it is. The moment lands heavy. The audience goes, oh, that unmistakable reaction. Chris doesn't look surprised. He just nods slowly. Yeah. Whoopi finally speaks, her tone calm but firm. So let's talk about it. Silence. You can feel every person in the room leaning in now. Chris shifts slightly in his seat. All right. Whoopi continues, looking directly at him. You said in an interview that some voices on daytime television pick and choose when to stand strong and when to stay quiet. Chris nods. I said that. Joy jumps in. That's a big accusation. Chris responds quickly. It's an observation. Sunny adds. And people assumed you were talking about Whoopi. Chris glances at Whoopi briefly, then back at the table. I didn't name names. Whoopi doesn't break eye contact. But you're here now. Another pause. Chris exhales lightly, then says, Yeah, I am. The audience is completely locked in now, silent, waiting. Whoopi leans slightly forward. So say it clearly. That's where the tension peaks for the first time. Chris looks at her, no smile now. All right, he says quietly. And the room holds its breath. Chris leans forward slightly, resting his hands on the table now, his tone calm but more serious than before. All right, since we're here. The audience is completely quiet. He glances briefly across the panel, then looks back at Whoopi. What I meant was, sometimes people with the biggest platforms don't always use them the same way when it matters. You can hear a few murmurs ripple through the crowd. Whoopi doesn't react immediately. She just watches him. And you feel like I do that? Chris shrugs lightly. I feel like sometimes, yeah. The audience reacts, a mix of surprise and tension. Joy immediately jumps in. That's a pretty strong thing to say to someone sitting right in front of you. Chris nods. That's why I'm saying it here. A few claps break out, not overwhelming, but noticeable. Sunny leans in, her tone more pointed now. Can you give an example? Because it's easy to say something broad like that. Chris tilts his head. You want specifics? Sunny doesn't hesitate. Yes. There's a slight shift in the audience, people leaning forward, some already anticipating where this is going. Chris takes a breath. There have been moments, big conversations, where people expected stronger takes, clearer positions, and what they got instead was neutrality. Whoopi finally responds, her voice steady. Or perspective. Chris nods. Perspective is fine, but sometimes perspective sounds a lot like avoiding the heat. That line lands hard. The audience reacts louder this time, some clapping, some, oh. Joy shakes her head. Or maybe it's called being responsible. Not everything needs to be turned into a headline or a dramatic stance. Chris looks at her. But this is a show built on opinions. Sarah jumps in quickly, trying to balance things. It's also built on conversation, though. Not just taking sides. Chris nods. Exactly. Conversation. But conversation only works when people are honest about where they stand. Whoopi finally leans forward a bit more, her tone sharpening just slightly. You're assuming I'm not. Chris meets her gaze. I'm saying sometimes it doesn't feel clear. The room gets quiet again. Sunny steps in. But clarity doesn't always mean picking a side that satisfies everyone. Chris responds immediately. I'm not talking about satisfying people. I'm talking about being real. Joy crosses her arms slightly. So now you're the judge of what's real? Chris smiles faintly. No. I'm just somebody who notices patterns. A few audience members laugh nervously. Whoopi tilts her head. Patterns according to you. Chris nods. Yeah, according to me. There's a pause. Then Whoopi says, you know what's interesting? People always say they want honesty, until they hear something they don't agree with. Chris doesn't hesitate. That goes both ways. Audience reaction again louder. Sunny tries to steer it slightly. Let's not make this personal. Chris cuts in, still calm. It already is. That line shifts the energy again. Joy exhales. This is exactly what I was talking about earlier. Stirring things up. Chris turns to her. Or maybe just not pretending everything's fine. The audience claps, stronger this time. Sarah looks between them. But do you think there's value in keeping things measured? Especially on a show like this? Chris nods. Of course. But measured shouldn't mean watered down. Whoopi responds quickly. And bold shouldn't mean reckless. There's a brief pause after that, both sides holding their ground. Chris nods slowly. Fair. That one word softens the tension for a second. But only for a second. Sunny leans forward again. Chris, let me ask you this. Do you think comedians sometimes get a pass to say things that others wouldn't? Chris shrugs. We don't get a pass. We just say it anyway. That gets a mix of laughter and applause. Joy rolls her eyes slightly. That's convenient. Chris smirks. It's honest. Whoopi raises a hand slightly, trying to bring structure back. All right, let's slow this down for a second. The audience quiets. She looks directly at Chris. Because what you're saying, whether people agree or not, it's serious. Chris nods. It is. Whoopi continues. So I want to understand clearly. Are you saying that I avoid taking strong positions when it matters? Chris pauses. This time, he takes a little longer before answering. The audience is completely silent again. Finally, he says, I think sometimes you choose your moments. Whoopi's expression tightens just slightly. Of course I do. Chris leans in. Everybody does. But when you're in a position like this, people notice which moments you choose. That line lands heavy again. Sunny looks at Whoopi briefly, then back at Chris. But isn't that also part of being experienced? Knowing when to speak and when to listen. Chris nods. Yeah, but sometimes silence says more than words. A few audience members react, quiet sounds, a couple of claps. Joy shakes her head again. Or maybe silence is just not feeding into unnecessary drama. Chris turns to her. But this show thrives on discussing drama. The audience laughs, louder now. Even Sarah smiles slightly. Whoopi doesn't. She leans forward again, her tone now clearly more serious than before. Let me make something very clear. The room quiets instantly. I've been doing this a long time. I've seen conversations come and go, trends come and go, outrage come and go. And what I've learned is, not every moment deserves the same reaction. Chris listens, nodding slightly. Whoopi continues. So if I choose to speak differently on certain topics, that's not avoidance. That's experience. The audience applauds, strong, supportive. Chris waits until the applause dies down, then says, I respect that. A small pause. Then he adds, but experience can also make people comfortable. That line hits again. You can feel the shift immediately. Sunny exhales softly. Okay, Joy leans in. Now that sounds like a criticism. Chris looks at her. It is. The audience reacts, louder again. Sarah looks slightly concerned now. This is getting intense. Chris glances at her briefly. It's real. Whoopi doesn't smile this time. So what are you saying, Chris? That I've gotten comfortable? Chris holds her gaze. And for a moment, he doesn't answer. The silence stretches just long enough to make it uncomfortable. Then he says calmly but firmly, I'm saying, sometimes it looks like that. The audience reacts, a mix of gasps, claps, and tension. And now the table feels different. Not just a conversation anymore. Now it's a standoff. The reaction doesn't settle this time. It lingers. A mix of clapping, a few scattered, whoa, and that low hum of tension that fills the studio when something real just got said out loud. Whoopi sits still for a second, her expression unreadable. Then she exhales slowly, leans back slightly, and folds her hands together on the table. So that's how you see it, she says calm, but with weight behind it. Chris nods once. Sometimes, yeah. Joy immediately jumps in, her voice sharper now. I think what's happening here is you're taking your perspective as fact. Chris turns to her. No, I'm saying what I see. Just like everybody at this table does every day. Audience claps, louder again. Sunny raises a hand slightly. But there's a difference between sharing an opinion and questioning someone's integrity. Chris shakes his head. I didn't question her integrity. Sunny responds quickly. You implied she picks and chooses when to stand up. Chris leans forward again. Everybody picks and chooses. Whoopi finally speaks, cutting through the back and forth. Yes, we do. That's called being human. The audience reacts, applause, supportive. Chris nods. Exactly. Whoopi continues, her tone steady but firmer now. But what you're doing is framing that as a flaw, like it's something dishonest. Chris pauses for a second, then says, not dishonest, just noticeable. Joy lets out a small laugh, shaking her head. That's the same thing with nicer wording. A few audience members laugh. Chris smiles slightly. No, it's not. Dishonest means you're hiding something. Noticeable means people can see it. Sarah leans in, trying to mediate. But Chris, you have to understand how that lands, right? Especially on live TV. Chris nods. I do. That's why I'm not yelling. I'm just saying it. That line actually lightens the mood for a brief second. A few laughs, a few claps. But Whoopi doesn't move. She looks directly at him. Let me ask you something. Chris nods. Go ahead. Whoopi tilts her head slightly. Do you think you ever pick and choose what you say? Chris smiles immediately. Of course I do. The audience reacts, a little laughter, a few claps. Whoopi raises an eyebrow. So why is it different when I do it? Chris leans back slightly, thinking for a moment before answering. Because when I do it, I don't pretend I'm saying everything. There's a pause. That line lands quietly, but deeply. Sunny leans forward. Are you saying Whoopi pretends? Chris shakes his head slightly. I'm saying, sometimes it comes across like everything being said here is the full truth. Joy jumps in. It's a talk show, not a courtroom. Chris looks at her. Exactly. Which is why people expect honesty, not perfection. The audience reacts again, more clapping now. Sarah nods slowly. But honesty can look different depending on who you are, your experiences, Chris agrees. Absolutely. But it should still feel clear. Whoopi finally shifts forward again, her tone now more direct than at any point before. So let me be clear then. The room quiets instantly. I say what I believe when I believe it needs to be said. I don't perform for reactions, I don't chase headlines, and I don't feel the need to prove anything to anybody watching. Strong applause from the audience. Chris listens, nodding slightly. Whoopi continues. So if that reads as comfortable to you, that's your interpretation. Chris responds calmly. And I respect that. There's a brief pause. It almost feels like things might settle. But then Joy leans in again. I still think there's something else going on here. Chris looks at her. Like what? Joy gestures slightly with her hand. This feels less like a general observation and more like, you've had an issue with this show for a while. Audience reacts, curious murmurs. Chris lets out a small chuckle. An issue? Joy nods. Yeah, because this isn't the first time you've made comments about platforms like this. Sunny adds, or about hosts specifically. Chris shrugs. I talk about everything. Joy presses. But you keep coming back to this. Chris looks around the table, then back at her. Because this is where conversations happen that affect a lot of people. Sarah nods slightly. That's true. Chris continues. So when something feels off, people notice. Whoopi responds quickly. Or maybe they disagree. Chris nods. That too. There's a small pause. Sunny leans forward again, more serious now. Chris, let me ask you directly. Do you think this show lacks honesty? The audience goes quiet again. Chris takes a breath. This time, he chooses his words more carefully. I think sometimes it lacks risk. That line hits harder than anything before. The audience reacts loudly, gasps, claps, a few stunned laughs. Joy immediately shakes her head. That's ridiculous. Chris looks at her. Is it? Joy leans forward. Yes. People say bold things here all the time. Chris nods. Bold doesn't always mean risky. Sunny tilts her head. Explain that. Chris leans in slightly. Saying something that your audience already agrees with? That's not risky. The audience reacts again, louder. Sarah looks a bit surprised. Okay, that's a point. Joy looks frustrated now. So now you're saying we just play it safe? Chris shrugs. I'm saying sometimes it feels like that. Whoopi raises her hand slightly, stopping the back and forth again. All right. The room quiets. She looks directly at Chris, her tone now fully serious. You came here today knowing exactly what you were going to say. Chris meets her gaze. I came here knowing I wasn't going to fake anything. The audience reacts, strong applause. Whoopi doesn't smile. There's a difference. Chris nods. Yeah, there is. The silence that follows is heavier than before. Not chaotic. Not loud. Just heavy. Sarah finally breaks it softly. I think what's happening here is two very different ideas of what honesty looks like. Sunny nods. And two very different responsibilities. Joy adds, and maybe two very different audiences. Chris looks at all of them, then says quietly, maybe. Then he looks back at Whoopi. But that doesn't make one of them wrong. Whoopi responds just as calmly. It also doesn't make one of them right. They hold eye contact for a moment. The audience doesn't make a sound. For the first time since the conversation started, nobody is trying to jump in. Nobody is interrupting. It's just two people holding completely different views, and neither one backing down. And you can feel it. This isn't just a discussion anymore. This is a moment people are going to talk about long after the show ends. The silence lingers for a few seconds longer than anyone expects. It's not uncomfortable in a chaotic way. It's controlled, heavy, the kind of pause where everyone in the room knows they've just witnessed something real. Then slowly, the audience begins to react. A few claps at first. Then more. Not explosive, but strong, steady, and mixed. Some are clearly backing Whoopi. Others are reacting to Chris. Most are just responding to the tension, the honesty, the fact that neither side backed down. Whoopi leans back slightly, taking a breath, letting the moment settle before speaking again. Her voice is calm, but there's a finality to it. Now, well, that's what conversation looks like. A small ripple of laughter breaks the tension. Chris nods. Yeah, not always pretty. A few audience members laugh, some clap again. Joy exhales, shaking her head slightly but smiling now, trying to bring the tone down. I'll say this, you definitely didn't come here to play it safe. Chris smirks. You invited me. That gets a louder laugh from the audience. Sarah smiles, looking between them. I think people at home are probably having their own debate right now. Sunny nods. Oh, they definitely are. Whoopi glances toward the camera briefly, then back at Chris. And that's okay. That's what this is supposed to do. Chris leans back in his chair now, the intensity in his posture easing slightly. Exactly. There's a shift now, not back to lighthearted, but to something more reflective. Joy adjusts her cards, then looks up. I still don't agree with you. Chris shrugs. You don't have to. Joy nods. Good. Because I don't. The audience laughs. Sarah adds, but I do think there's something valuable in what you said about risk. Sunny glances at her. I was thinking the same thing. Whoopi listens, then says, there's always room to grow. For everybody. Chris nods. That's all I'm saying. For the first time in a while, there's a sense of balance at the table again. Not agreement, but understanding that the conversation has reached its peak. Whoopi straightens slightly, shifting back into host mode. All right, we're going to take a quick break. The audience claps, louder now, releasing the tension that's been building. As the cameras start to pull back slightly, you can see the hosts exchanging small looks, not dramatic but real. The kind of looks people give when something unexpected just happened on live television. Chris leans slightly toward Whoopi, saying something off mic. She responds with a small nod. It's not overly friendly, but it's not hostile either, just human. The show cuts to commercial. Backstage, the energy is completely different. Staff members are moving quickly, some whispering, some checking their phones. You can already see clips being pulled, moments being replayed. One producer says quietly, "That's going viral." Another nods. Already is. In another corner, a staff member scrolls through social media. People are split, like really split. You can almost feel it. The conversation has already left the studio and entered the world. Online, the reaction is immediate. Clips of the exchange start circulating within minutes. Some viewers are praising Chris for being real and saying what others won't. Others are defending Whoopi, calling her professional, measured, and experienced. Some posts highlight specific lines. Sometimes it lacks risk. Experience can make people comfortable. Not every moment deserves the same reaction. Each clip sparks its own debate. Comments flood in, thousands within the first hour. People arguing, agreeing, disagreeing, analyzing tone, body language, intent. Some say it was one of the most honest conversations they've seen on daytime TV in years. Others say it crossed a line. Back in the studio, after the break, the show continues, but the energy is different. The hosts are slightly more measured now, a bit more aware. Chris is still there, but quieter, letting the conversation move on to lighter topics. There are a few laughs, a few normal segments, but the earlier moment still lingers in the background. You can feel it even when nobody mentions it. Because moments like that don't just disappear. After the show wraps, the audience files out, still talking. You can hear snippets of conversation. He had a point, though. She handled that really well. That got intense. I didn't expect that at all. People aren't just leaving. They're carrying the conversation with them. Later that day, clips hit trending pages. Media outlets start picking it up. Headlines vary depending on the angle. Chris Rock calls out daytime TV culture live on air. Whoopi Goldberg responds calmly to on-air criticism. Explosive moment on daytime talk show sparks debate. The narrative shifts depending on who's telling it. But one thing is consistent. Everyone is talking about it. By the evening, even other shows are referencing it. Panel discussions. Reaction videos. Breakdowns of the exchange. Body language experts analyzing every look, every pause. It becomes more than just a moment. It becomes a conversation about conversation itself. And somewhere in all of that noise, the original moment still stands. Two people. Two perspectives. No shouting. No chaos. Just tension, honesty, and a refusal to back down. The next day, both Chris and Whoopi are asked about it in separate interviews. Chris keeps it simple. It was a conversation. Whoopi says something similar. That's what we do here. Neither escalates it further. Which, in a way, says even more. And now it's over to you. What did you think about that moment? Was Chris Rock right to speak so directly, or do you think Whoopi handled it the right way with experience and control? Drop your opinion in the comments. We want to hear both sides. And don't forget to subscribe to Talk Show Fallout for more real talk show stories, moments, and debates that get people talking.